And we're back. I'm so excited to be making this video, my first official review on this channel, and I wasn't sure, if my first review would be an album I enjoyed, if it would be an album that I didn't enjoy, and I figured that it would be way more enjoyable for the first one to be an album that I did enjoy, and in that regard I'm very lucky because today I am going to be reviewing West Indies by John Keith and Miles Minnick. Now at this point I've listened to this album a total of 13 times from front to back, partly in preparation for this video, but also because I've just loved listening to this album so much I keep going back to it. And yeah, the 13 is just the amount of times that I've listened to it front to back. That's not even to mention the number of songs I've gone back to and played multiple times over. Now coming into this project, John Keith and Miles Minnick feel like in a lot of ways a pretty natural duo, both hailing from California and being the biggest Western-based artists in the largely Southern and East Coast dominated subgenre that is Christian hip-hop. And these guys feeling like a natural duo is something that my wife acknowledged as well. She doesn't listen to as much CHH as I do, but she knows a handful of these guys well enough. After all, they're two of the guys in Christian hip-hop that seem to have the most aura, as the kids would say. But I don't think the fit stops there and even goes a little further than that. John Keith is about 10 years deep into his career at this point. He has at least one instant classic CHH album, and depending on who you ask, a couple more that have the potential to be classics when it's all said and done. Not only that, but of course he's a member of Indie Tribe, the most notable Christian hip-hop collective at current time. And despite this success, John has said that as much as he enjoys creating art, he hates the marketing aspect of music and views that as a weak point for him. And so what does he do? He makes the genius move to team up for an album with the guy that's potentially the best at marketing himself in all of CHH. Just to give an example of what I mean by this is Miles Minnick has 4 times the number of Instagram followers that John Keith has. Despite in my mind, and I'm sure many of you would agree with me, that John is the bigger artist of the two, at least in the CHH spheres. So in terms of rollout and all that stuff, this could really prove to be a big marketing win for John. But also that isn't the only value that Miles Minnick has. He genuinely does know how to make catchy music. So much so that I found myself placing his album Christ-Like California at number 12 on my list last year of my favorite albums from 2024, despite the style of it clashing so heavily with my usual tastes. And then from Miles's perspective, why wouldn't you team up with one of the most talented individuals in the space who already has a devoted and loyal fan base? And then beyond that, of course, this album really allows these two guys to kind of capitalize on the movement that the West is having right now. In light of the Kendrick Lamar-Drake beef and the subsequent GNX album, an extremely West Coast feeling mainstream album from one of the biggest rappers in the world. And so coming into this album, it really felt like it had everything going for it, though I don't think I was alone in being concerned about how the disparity in sheer rapping and lyrical ability between these two guys would translate on a joint project. And yeah, spoiler for the rest of the review is this will be a recurring topic of discussion, but if there's one glaring flaw of this album, it's exactly that. That said, Miles manages to ultimately hold his own. He didn't allow John to completely body him or even dirty 30 him. A respectable 3-0 is probably the most accurate description if we were to use battle rap terms. Also coming into this album, I was curious about what approach would be taken in terms of content. John's last solo album is of course the ever-conceptual, ever-large Eremos. And while I wasn't expecting a concept album or anything, I wasn't sure if maybe it would try to be thematic in some sort of way, or longer than it ultimately ended up being. But we got the most likely scenario in my opinion, that being just a 25-minute project full of West Coast bangers. It doesn't try to take itself too seriously or be anything that it's not. And the intro track Message from the Coast Guard really sets the tone in that way, with DJ Head having some funny lines, most notably that the Lord rested on the 7th day, and on the 8th day he wested. It's a very tongue-in-cheek introduction, and it sets the rest of the album to be that way as well. Like when I had heard that intro and seen that the project was only 25 minutes long, I was like, oh yeah, this isn't going to try to be anything super deep or conceptual, and I'm fine with that. It didn't need to be. And then the album officially opens with the song Get It Together. It starts with a pretty solid verse from Miles Minnick that had me feeling like, oh, maybe it'll be a little bit closer performance-wise between these two guys than I had initially been thinking. And then John started rapping, and I was like, oh yeah, never mind. John is really just different. This track also sets the tone pretty well of what to expect from a production standpoint. It's a very high-quality West Coast beat, which apart from a couple of exceptions that I'll get to down the line, is pretty much the case for the entire project. This song is followed by Club, which pretty much follows the same pattern but switches it up a little bit by having a more distinct chorus than the first track. This time John has the first verse, and like, I don't know if John has ever had a better rap performance throughout an entire project than he does throughout West Indies here. Like this obviously isn't the best project that John Keith has ever made, but from a rapping standpoint, I don't know if we've ever seen this from him. I mean, multiple beat switches on multiple tracks that he handles seamlessly, including 3 beat switches on this track alone, as well as some absolutely absurd bars. On this one, there are a lot of lines I liked, including Pharisees on my page, well, welcome to Blocktown, which his delivery on is just an example of his tongue-in-cheek delivery that's kind of all over the track list here. Followed shortly after by This is the Renaissance, you already know the dilly. It's just a stupidly hard verse, except for the line where John says, my padre been making hits, I'm batting 100 truly. Which, yeah, John, batting 100 isn't good. Batting 1,000, I think that's what you, like, batting 1,000 is a perfect batting average. Batting 100 is not good, John. It's not good. But anyways, then Miles' verse on this track is one of his weaker in the project, I think. Which, yeah, just doesn't help considering it's paired up next to one of John's best. Miles seemed to run into some syllabic issues here where he was just trying to fit syllables in places that they couldn't quite fit, and it felt a little awkward. Once again, though, this track has a great beat and a really killer bass line, and that's true as well of the next track, Circle, which has a looping bass throughout the chorus. One of Minnick's strongest verses comes on this track, even though it's slightly short, where he raps with almost a whiny, childlike inflection, where I can just picture him saying it with like a pouty face. And yeah, it's just weirdly unique and catchy. And then John's verse is just pretty good, but far from being his strongest on the project, though his ability to change speed here while rapping is kind of crazy, which we had heard on Club as well. My biggest takeaway from this track, though, is the reminder that Miles' biggest asset musically is his ability to make a catchy hook. What he provides in that way is really demonstrated on this track with Now We Going Dumb in the Circle, in the Circle, in the Circle, being stuck in my head for the past week. And I'll say Miles' ability to perform catchy choruses is another noticeable aspect of the next track, that being the lead single from this project, Him, which, yeah, we got months ago at this point. This track has a split chorus between the two guys, and I'll say that John's portion of the chorus is a little grating to me. If his problems with me, then his problems with him is overly repetitive and is only redeemed by Miles coming in a little higher. That releases the tension built up from hearing the word him said 80 times in a row. Just kidding, it's only 15, but it feels like 80. Miles' verse is pretty average, not his best, not his worst. And I feel similarly about John's verse. Not really too much to mention about it. And yeah, I think this might be the weakest song on the album, which I kind of like when the songs on a project top the singles, more than when you hear a project and the singles are far and away the best song, and there's nothing to get from any of the additional tracks. And yeah, Him is far from a bad song, but I think it is my least favorite here. This song was followed by God Was Right, which about 5 seconds into hearing it, I was like, John produced this, didn't he? And then when I went and checked the credits, I was proven right. It just has that one signature synth that's all over a lot of John's previous music. John solos the chorus here, and it's pretty great. And then Miles has, without a doubt, his strongest verse on the entire project, with lines like making hits in LA like Otani, and the king put his son in the game like it's Brawny, which maybe are somewhat obvious punchlines, but somebody had to put them together, and Miles managed to be the one to do it here. And then John's verse has a couple great lines. I loved, y'all be some pick-me's, but I'm already chosen. I had to leave her on scene, she got wholly ghosted. But yeah, even Miles' best verse on this project gets bested by John here, though not by much. Also, John has a line on the song where he says YHWH the only top 3, which is obviously a Trinity bar, but is there any chance it's doubling as a reference to the WLAK song YHWH? Probably not, but if he's implying that YHWH is a top 3 CHH song all time, he'd be right. And actually, while we're on the topic of WLAK, why don't we speak about the album cover for a second? When I played the album for my wife, she asked me what I thought about the cover, and I said I liked it because it reminded me of the WLAK cover. Then she said, yeah, when she saw the cover, that's the first thing that she thought of as well, though she didn't like it for that reason because it felt about 10 years outdated to her, though she does like the WLAK cover. It just feels like a bit of a product of its time. And yeah, I'm curious to know what your thoughts are. Do you like the album cover? Am I accurate in saying that it's similar to WLAK? Did you think that when you saw it? Let me know in the comments. Also, if I've just said WLAK a million times and you have no idea what I'm talking about, they were a collective made up of Collision Records label mates Swoop, Dre Murray, Kristen Gray, Alex Faith, and they're responsible for making the greatest collective CHH album in CHH history, that being self-titled WLAK back in 2013, which is why I think maybe John is playing homage to that track here, but probably not. And then moving to Look. Look is probably the best song on this entire project, if it weren't for the inclusion of another song here further down the track list that I'll get to. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. John's verse is great, and it's a very passable verse from Miles. Though the out-of-nowhere line, wait, side note, no Smoke Fest unless you book West Indies, was clearly written to be performed at Smoke Fest with the vision of everyone yelling it along while it's said, which I don't mind too much. I'm sure that'll happen and it'll be fun, but it just kind of adds to the unserious feeling of the project. His sheesh ad-libs on the second refrain of the chorus go stupidly hard though. And then John's verse is one of his best, which I feel like I keep saying, but is really a testament to just how great his writing and performances have been on this project. I love the line, I be really boxing in them prayers, ain't no wish list, just implying that his relationship with God is deeper than just merely asking him for things, like he's steadily wrestling with God. And he contrasts this with people that he refers to later on in the verse, when he says, you only praying when you're running out of zeros, God ain't no genie in a lamp, you a weirdo. And then my favorite line, again excluding some of the lines from the track that I'll be talking to in a bit later down the project, is where John says, got a couple homies that want blood, it's a sickness. Christ gave blood as a gift. Is it Brismas? Is you brished him? Which isn't like this crazy triple entendre or anything, but it's the simplicity here that makes me love it so much. It's slick, it's quick, it's witty, it's funny, and yeah, he just delivers it so tongue-in-cheek yet again. And then we get a total change of pace on the next track, Don't Forget, whose laid-back line mixed with some relationship-angled lyrics feel like something straight off of John's 2021 project, Summertime in the Village. And this track adds a nice bit of variety that I think was kind of needed at this point. And I'll say that both Look and Don't Forget serve a reminder that not only is John one of the best rappers out, he can also sing a chorus as well as anybody. You know, just in case you need another reminder of just how talented this guy is. And yeah, speaking of John's talent, why don't we talk about the track that I've alluded to at several points throughout this review as being the best on the project. Though it had been released as a single by John back in September, that of course being the Bryson Gray diss track, With It. This track is led into by a short interlude by the legendary hip-hop talk show host Sway, saying that people who rap about God can't rap really, with John replying, they said that, before the beat starts, which is an absolutely absurd beat, by the way. And what adds to the absurdity, I just mentioned John's ability in rapping and singing, is the fact that John solo produced this track. And yeah, somehow on a project with production credits from the likes of Enzo, Rodney Jerkins, 1995, the best produced song on the entire project was done by John himself. Now to give a bit of background on this track in case you don't know, John Keith and other Indie Tribe members, along with a lot of other Christian rappers, had been involved in a public beef, so to speak, with rapper Bryson Gray, which had kinda stemmed from Gray's persistent pestering of these guys for being too soft on sin in their tracks or not talking about specific sins that he wanted them to. And I'll have more to say on that in a bit, but just to finish the history lesson, going back to almost 2 years ago, John Keith had a line on his song James Dean where he says, some of you is corny, you say you know the truth, but the way you MAGA step, I wonder if he knows you, which was indirect but taken to be about Bryson Gray and Tyson James, later confirmed to be the case by John himself. Bryson then responded by releasing a diss track called Message to CHH, in which he called out John by name. John didn't take it very seriously at the time, though, and chose not to respond with a diss of his own, which I think was the right move. There just wasn't really a need. And then it was fairly quiet until this past September, when John made an appearance on The Radar, and in his freestyle he said, I can never act like we a team, them boys know a different Christ, this is not the same thing. Which references John's view that Bryson isn't a true Christian, as he has openly denounced the orthodoxical and historic view of the Trinity and the divinity of the Son, which, yeah, from the standpoint of Orthodox Christians would disqualify you from being in the fold and would thus make you a wolf. But regardless, once again on this freestyle appearance, he makes a subtle diss at Bryson Gray, but this one felt a little different, as it had been over a year since the beef had kind of resolved, and this kind of brought it back up, seemingly out of nowhere and unprovoked. But yeah, if you're unaware, around this time in the months prior to this freestyle being released, there was something big happening in the mainstream, where two of the biggest rappers in the world, Kendrick Lamar and Drake, engaged in the most public and largest rap beef in history. And John Keith has very openly discussed his admiration for Kendrick Lamar, often citing him as the greatest rapper of all time. And if I'm being honest, there have been points where I've listened to John Keith's music, seen interviews of him, social media, anything else that I see from him can sometimes give off a bit of a mainstream wannabe persona. And I partly think it was from that Kendrick and Drake beef that John decided he wanted to take another shot at Bryson Gray in hopes that it would turn into some sort of rap beef, that he would have the opportunity to fight back, which is exactly what he did. Following his On the Radar appearance, Bryson Gray responded with a diss track, and after a couple more were kind of sent back and forth, John released With It, this song, which ultimately served as the knockout punch. And while I'm not crazy about the origins of this track being inspired by the Kendrick-Drake beef, if that is the case and my speculation is right, from it we got one of the hardest songs in CHH history. I mean, John doesn't hold back in the slightest here. The beat is crazy, the chorus is crazy, and the lyrics are the equivalent of killing someone, putting them in a body bag, and putting that body bag in a body bag. And I don't feel the need to say too much more, because I'm sure if you're watching this, you've heard the song and you know exactly what I'm talking about. But from my perspective of Bryson's beliefs on the Trinity and just his online persona, he comes across as a modern-day Pharisee. And John continues to question here in the first verse of this song whether or not Bryson is really saved, ultimately suggesting that the answer is no, before absolutely exploding in the second verse. He eases in a little slowly with one of my favorite lines, "Anyone who's sinless in this joint, go ahead, bust a move," referencing Jesus in John 8:7, where he says he is without sin, can cast the first stone, in response to the Pharisees who are about to stone a woman caught up in adultery. And then in the rest of the verse, John calls out Bryson's pharisaical tendencies of casting stones at different types of sinners while overlooking his own sin. And he just does it in the most clever ways. The stone heart line is crazy, the knowledge line is crazy, the Caitlyn line is crazy. This verse is just absolutely bonkers. And I'll leave it there because I feel like I've been talking about this track for hours. But I will say that the placement of this track on West Indies feels a little weird. It feels a bit like when Andy Minnick tacked Coming in Hot onto the end of Neverland 2, though With It is a million times better than Coming in Hot is. Like, I'm never going to think of this song in the future as being a West Indies song. Like, it very much exists on its own. So yeah, it's a weird thing where it makes the album better because of the fact that it's one of the greatest Christian hip-hop songs of all time, so obviously it improves the album, but also makes it a little worse because it feels a little out of place. It just kind of further solidifies that this project isn't something to be taken too seriously. From there we get a solo track from Miles Minnick, titled New Mainstream, to close off the project, and it's a decent song, but hearing this one right next to With It just further adds to the feeling that these guys aren't in the same ballpark from a rapping standpoint. Not that New Mainstream is trying to be a With It level rap song, to be fair. And yeah, if you didn't know, New Mainstream is a term that Miles Minnick has been using for a little while now to describe the ways in which Christian culture is influencing and even infiltrating secular spaces for the glory of God. And yeah, it's a good song. I like it. I respect it. But these two songs feel more like bonus tracks than they do a part of an already very short project. And yeah, that's the track list. I really enjoyed this album. At the end of the year, I think we'll look back on it as being one of the best albums of the year, though I do hope it gets topped before next January. And the only things that are really holding this project back are the last two songs feeling like bonus tracks, many of the songs following the same pattern of a West Coast beat, catchy chorus, single verse from each of the guys. And not to beat a dead horse, but the noticeable difference in rapping ability between John and Miles is a bit distracting. But otherwise I loved it, and I think I'll revisit it quite a bit because it's fun, and John's lyricism and ability to so seamlessly just kind of change his flow when he's rapping kind of astounds me, and I'll want to continue to hear it. And yeah, it's for those reasons that for my first official review on this channel, I've made the decision to give West Indies by John Keith and Miles Minnick an 84%. What did you think of this album? Did you agree with my praises, my criticisms? Is there anything you disagreed with? Did I score it too high, too low? Let me know in the comments below. And be sure to subscribe, as I'm planning on doing album reviews for all relatively large CHH albums that will be released this year. And yeah, until next time, I'll see ya.